Good morning, everyone. Wherever you're watching, welcome to the City of Perth Parade and Commemorative Service on ABC television. It's an integral part of this hallowed day, the most revered day in the nation. A day people from all walks of life, from all parts of this great state, come together to say thanks to those who served and to those who currently serve, as well as reflecting on and pausing to give thanks to those who gave the ultimate sacrifice in the service of Australia. Clint Wilden in commentary with you this morning. The weather for today is cool but clear, perfect for those marching and for those watching alongside the parade route, whether they be in the VIP seats or having made their way along to stand alongside St George's Terrace. We're expecting a crowd of around about 30,000 people today, and we know that many more of you will be watching on at home around Western Australia. The senior representatives of the Australian Defence Forces here in WA will step off from the corner of Barrack Street and St George's Terrace at 9:15, and here they come. They'll be followed by the WA Mounted Police, and behind them the likes of the veteran carrying military jeeps and vehicles, the ex-services units, the Corps and Regimental Associations. The march, as you see, will be heading east along St George's Terrace, turning right then into Victoria Avenue and dispersing onto Langley Park. And that is a good view, I would reckon, this morning, where that young man happens to be. And like last year, following the march, the commemorative service will be held at the Perth Concert Hall. That is due to start at 11 o'clock, and we'll bring you that entire program. It is a day to celebrate the Aussie spirit and the character of the nation as we pause to reflect on those fallen while serving the nation. Welcome wherever you're watching. I'm delighted to be joined in commentary this morning once again by Wayne Gardner, a military historian from the Army Museum in Fremantle. Good morning to you, Wayne.
Yeah, good morning, Clint. Great to be here. A terrific day all round, and some important commemorations are going on again this year. Even though we've seen the last of the 100th anniversaries of the Great War commemorations, which commenced in 2014 and finished in 2018. There are other commemorations, whether the 80th, 75th, down to the 50th of different conflicts and missions that we're on, right down to some of our UN in 25 years to commemorate as well. So a lot to cover, a lot to speak about, and it's a wonderful day here in Perth for sure.
And welcome again to Steve Danaher, a military historian from the Military Historical Society of Australia. Welcome, Steve.
Yeah, it's good morning, gents. Another wonderful day in Perth. The sun is shining. And it was interesting this morning chatting to a couple of young people that, outside the commentary box here, just taking an interest in what we do to get this telecast to you, the viewers at home.
So here we see the three services at the very start, the senior representatives, as they march their way, and behind them the mounted police. What's the theory behind the way to start this parade, Wayne?
Well, they'll have the three senior services there, so in order of sequence, the senior service being the Navy, Royal Australian Navy. On your left is Captain Ainsley Moorthorpe, Conspicuous Service Cross, CSC. He's the commander at HMAS Stirling, newly appointed. He'll be first Anzac Day parade in Perth. Then comes the Army with Brigadier Peter Moore, who's the commander of 13 Brigade, that looks after the Army in Western Australia. And then the junior service, or we don't quite sort of remind them of that all the time, but the RAAF with Wing Commander Andrew Brandon, CO of 25 Squadron. And then, of course, the police mounted group, which signifies the civil authority granting permission to the military to march through the city.
Worth mentioning too, for two of those gentlemen, Captain Ainsley Moorthorpe and Commanding Officer Andrew Brandon, their first time marching here, as we see again the WA Police mounted section, but Captain Moorthorpe just taking charge in February 2019. Commanding Officer Andrew Brandon in January 2019, as they make their way past the saluting dais. And there, his first Perth Anzac Day march, as the eyes are to the right, the Governor of WA, the Honourable Kim Beazley AC. We'll see him again in just a moment. The first time that he's been involved in an Anzac Day march, the 33rd Governor of WA. There he is.
So he's been very involved since becoming Governor, Clint. We've seen him at a number of functions around Perth, the patron of a number of organisations. So he's had a very, very busy time indeed. These are the state presidents of the RSL, Naval Association and the RAF Association, carrying the Australian flags and the New Zealand flags. Most of the veterans appear to be Vietnam veterans by the look of them as well.
Nice touch with the two national flags there, just reinforcing the connection of the Anzacs with Australia and New Zealand, as we see another shot right up St George's Terrace. And WA Mounted Police, there's 12 horses in today's march, or 10 actually in today's march, 12 marching, 2 of them were sent down to Albany, and of course leading the way, as he's often done, Louis, the gelding, been part of the police service since 2013, and this is the Royal Australian Navy Band, the WA detachment, the Bandmaster Petty Officer Brian Horlock, and they've led the Perth Anzac Day Parade since the band's inception.
So this is the first of the contingents, being the senior service. The Navy are leading the parade. And they represent all the units at HMAS Stirling and in Western Australia, and they take a dominant part in Western Australia these days, more so than perhaps the Army. The Navy also this year, Clint, celebrating a 75th anniversary for the Battle of Leyte Gulf, 23rd of 26th of October 1944. So this was arguably one of the largest naval battles in history, and certainly the largest in World War II. HMAS Australia was damaged by a kamikaze attack that killed a captain and many of her crew during that particular major battle. And as I said, it went on for a number of days. So this will be a major event within the naval calendar this year. The Navy provides maritime force that contributes to the ADF's capacity to defend Australia and contribute to regional security, support global interests and shape the strategic environment and protects national interests. And this is achieved by providing maritime patrols and response and interdiction and strategic strike and protection of shipping and offshore territories and resources. Another commemorative one too for them is Lieutenant Commander Leon Goldsworthy, Royal Australian Naval Volunteer Reserve in World War II. He gained the George Cross, the highest award next to the Victoria Cross, and he gained that 75 years ago in 1944 for rendering mines safe in the United Kingdom. And he had previously been awarded the George Medal and went on to be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, and making him the most highly decorated Australian naval serviceman in history. So again, a lot going on for the Navy. Peacetime activities for the Navy also include maritime surveillance and response within Australia's offshore maritime zones, and hydrographic, oceanographic and meteorological support operations. They're naturally very big on humanitarian assistance and maritime search and rescue. So there's certainly a lot going on for them, apart from their operations in the Gulf, where they're very active against the piracy and the ongoings there, and that would reflect the range of medals that are being worn today, because they are seeing a lot of active service on their deployments to the Middle East and Indian Ocean.
It's the Australian Army Band, Perth, led by the music director, Captain Matthew O'Keefe, formed back in 1949, originally a brass band known as the Western Command Band, converted to a concert band in 1972. And in 1993, the band transformed from a full-time regular Army band to an Army Reserve band of 42 Army Reserve soldiers. We'll pause for a second, have a little listen as they walk on, march by.
So the new service dress that's been introduced throughout the Australian Army is part of the recent 100th anniversary commemorations, because the new khaki service dress colour reflects that khaki of the Great War, the World War I soldiers. And they've been issued across the board within the officer ranks and other ranks as well. So this is 13 Brigade in Western Australia, and will include 109 Signal Squadron as well. Brigadier Charles Moore is the brigade commander. And on parade today, you'll see A Squadron 10th Light Horse, commanded by Major Dwayne Nurse. 11th 28th Battalion Royal Western Australian Regiment will be on parade, as will the 13th Combat Service and Support Battalion and 16th Battalion Royal Western Australian Regiment. 10th Light Horse has its guidon on parade today. That's the burgundy-coloured flag, we'll call it, but the guidon is what the Light Horse carry, and the infantry carry their colours. The
famous slouch hat, and we just saw the emu plumes. The story behind that?
Well, very quickly, came out of Queensland in the late 1890s. The mounted infantry were up there during a strike by miners up there, and in downtime they were chasing emus, and used to pluck the emu feathers from these emus and pop them in their hat, and that would show their prowess as horsemen, and that tradition stayed, and in World War I they officially became the tradition of the light horse. The colour party just there of 1128 Battalion, one of our very famous units. Sadly, though, both battalions lost some of their former COs through the year. Lieutenant Colonel Ray Mawson, RFD ED of 16 Battalion, Cameron Highlanders of Western Australia, also a long-time volunteer at the Army Museum, passed away. And also Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Arbuckle, RFD ED of 28 Battalion, Royal West Australian Regiment, and also 11 Independent Rifle Company. But it's great with the parade today where we see a mix of units and the ability for the public to see the tradition of carrying the guidon and our regimental colours that have all the battle honours from the Boer War through to more recent operations that those units were involved in. And remember too, the Army Reserve has deployed into Bougainville and into the Solomons as well, and into East Timor. So apart from being part-time servicemen and women, they have a very active role indeed. And again, the medals reflect either long service or where you see more than one or two that will reflect their overseas service. Female captain in the Royal Australian Engineers. Of course, the women play a major part within our all three services. So with Combat Services, a unit as well, which is an interesting one, that covers the Administrative Support Battalion and has 7th Field Ambulance, 10 Transport Squadron, 13 Field Supply Company, 5th Dental Unit and 113 Field Workshops. There's the Regimental Sergeant Major with his pay stick, the traditional badge of office for an RSM, and the large insignia on his arm, the National Coat of Arms there. Also on parade will be 3rd Light Battery, 9 Regiment, Royal Australian Artillery. So they're our artillery component in Western Australia.
As you can see, the crowds that have come along in big numbers here for the Perth Anzac Day Parade and Commemorative Service here on ABC Television. Clint Wilden alongside Wayne Gardner and Steve Danaher in commentary for 2019.
So 2 badges there you see on their hats, the Royal Australian Electrical Mechanical Engineers, and then the one behind is the Royal Australian Signal Corps. They all wear the Australian Rising Sun or the General Service Badge.
This is Trinity College Pipes and Drums and Coastal's Scottish Pipe Band. Combined bands now marching for this Anzac Day Parade.
I'd just like to mention also, if I may, that the Army Museum of Western Australia and Historic Artillery Barracks is open today, especially between 11 and 3. And for those veterans wearing medals, they'll be allowed in for free. So we'd love to see you down there later on.
Trinity College Pipes and Drums formed in 1962. And the first music ensembles established at Trinity College. And the Coastal Scottish Pipe Band, as I said, known as Coastals, the oldest civilian band in WA, established in 1898. And behind them, the Royal Australian Air Force, making their way down St George's Terrace.
So the Royal Australian Air Force, and their parade commander this year is Wing Commander Graham Williams, currently the commanding officer of 79 Squadron up at RAF Base Pearce. Again, a large contingent of uniformed services. Interesting about the history too, with the RAF base on the 10th of March 1938, 6 Hawker Demon fighter bombers and 1 Avro Ants and support aircraft were the first aircraft to land at the newly commissioned RAF Station Pearce. And here we have the police working dogs with the Air Force. Always a great sight to see and a great favourite with the crowds as well. And of course they play a massive part within defence in all 3 services now.
I just noticed Jen Richards, the WOD for RAF Base Pearce. She is the only female WOD, and that's Warrant Officer Discipline, the equivalent of RSM in the Army, Regimental Sergeant Major. She's been doing a sterling job down there for a long time, and I think she's due for retirement in a couple of years, but she loves her time over here in Western Australia.
So one of the Air Force Band, of course, and that gives us that opportunity to keep in step with everyone that's going on, and the Cadet Band as well. And we hopefully get a chance to speak about the importance of cadets and the contribution they make within the community. Of course, the way they develop and train and work with older folk within the services, learn the traditions that they carry as well, and of course lift their own self-esteem and build their general interest in the community in general.
You can hear the band in the background there, the 7-Wing Air Force Cadets Drum Corps, as you can see. They've got cadets travelling from as far away as Mandurah and Rockingham to attend training.
Also, Clint, the Republic of Singapore Air Force, the RSAF 130 Squadron, conducts basic wings course training with the Pilatus PC-21 aircraft up at Pierce. And the other squadron was 79 Squadron, which we mentioned before, was reformed in its present reincarnation during 1998 and is currently stationed at RAF Base Pierce. And they fly the Hawk 127 jet trainer aircraft. Also within the Air Force, you have number 2 Expeditionary Health Squadron. This provides expeditionary and fixed base health support to ADF operations, comprises medical officers, dentists and nurses, and also number 3 Security Forces Squadron, detachment of Pierce.
The WA Police Pipe Band, more than half a century old, formed in 1966.
And the Napier Tartan, in honour of one of their former police commissioners. And one of the very highly regarded bands too. I think they've paraded at Edinburgh Tattoo on a number of occasions.
And very busy too, appearing at 240 community and policing engagements every single year. Now to the WA Police.
Yes, well, the WA Police, long-standing institution in Western Australia, and with that, of course, there's with their UN peacekeeping, it's the 55th anniversary of Australia's police involvement in Cyprus.
And that's represented by the Blue Beret?
Absolutely, worn with pride by many nations across the globe doing their peacekeeping duties. And one of the other things to mention is a gallantry award of the Star of Courage was recently bestowed upon Stephanie Bachorsky for a very violent domestic incident in Inaloo recently. So well done her for a job, a very brave effort.
I'll say indeed, very high award. We just saw also the Kinross Police Rangers go into the march as well, Clint.
This is the WA Fire and Emergency Services Concert Band, once the Perth Concert Band, led by Gay Baker band leader, as they make their way down St George's Terrace.
And then we had the Department of Fire and Emergency Services. West Australia's leading hazard management agency, and of course the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, or DFES, performs a critical role coordinating emergency services for a range of natural disasters and emergency incidents threatening life and property, so they're very well known indeed. Elaine Airy's probably marching down there with them today, the daughter of RSM Fred Airy of 2nd Force Machine Guns. The Department of Fire and Emergency Service Cadet Corps, again fostering youth within those organisations. And a lot of them obviously become part of those senior groups as they get older and contribute to all the services that these Department of Fire and Emergency Services need to deal with throughout the year. And they're virtually on duty 24/7.
So we're about to move into the ex-service contingent here. Just in front of them, the Perth Fortress Salvation Army Band. There they are, the oldest Salvation Army Band in WA.
And we could just catch a glimpse too, Clint, of the WA World War I banners of the different units and the Victoria Cross recipients, escorted by the West Australian Great War Living History Association.
There they are, right at the very back of your screen. You can see them making their way down.
And a proud history of the Victoria Cross in Western Australia, starting with Fred Bell during the Boer War, right up to modern day with Ben Robert Smith, and there's a photo of him right there, being awarded a Victoria Cross in Afghanistan.
And the other banners have the different units where their members no longer survive. That generation's gone. Here's the Great War Living History Association, always resplendent in their very accurate uniforms of different periods of time, World War I, Boer War and Vietnam, I see there.
And Legacy being led by Peter Remmet, who's gone from being a ward to now the president of Legacy in Western Australia. Legacy was formed in 1928 here in WA, and in 2018 there was an amalgamation between Perth and Fremantle Legacies to make Legacy WA. And we have a number of awards in there, including Keith Burbridge, who's marching in honour of his cousin, Lieutenant Brian Walker, who was killed in Vietnam with 5th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment.
That flame was lit today from the Eternal Flame at Kings Park. This is the Jeep section, and always a much-loved section, Wayne Gardner.
That's right. I see John Dwyer, a long-time member of 10th Light Horse Regiment and current president of the Secretary of the Royal Australian Armoured Corps Association. Ted White waving there, and Ted was a World War II veteran. He's in his late 90s now, and he was a former CEO of 10th Light Horse and honorary colonel. So within the Jeeps, you should mention George Goldie.
Yes, absolutely. George Goldie, what a champion man he is. Age 97, he gave us a talk at the Military Historical Society only last week about his time during World War II. He enlisted in 1941 and served during the Borneo campaigns, and he was 97. I call that's not quite correct because he acts like a 77-year-old. He bounded up that hill that day. Fantastic chap.
Amazing bloke. He's driven in this march for decades, carrying other veterans, and in his restored Willys Jeep. But there's a range of veterans that we can see there. The atomic survivors. These were the soldiers who were virtually guinea pigs with some of the atomic testing within Western Australia and Australia generally, not realising, of course, the fallout literally from those days.
Trevor Jones, the passenger in that Jeep, and then Jeep number 14 is Les Anderson.
And there's a great range of veterans covering a lot of the conflicts from World War II onwards. There's Padre Keith Moody, C and B squadrons 68, 69 in Vietnam with the Royal Australian Armoured Corps. Bob Flett, RAN, and one of the carers. World War II man with his Pacific Star group up. We'll have people like Les Anderson, a 21 Supply Platoon, and Jim Jackson from Vietnam, and Arthur Carbon, 6 Heavy, and Frank Cox from one of the CMF boys as well as there. There's a wonderful opportunity in those particular vehicles, and beautifully restored they are too. In the Parenti, it's that sort of Land Rover looking vehicle. David Staniforth Smith, the driver, and passenger is Trevor Jones, as we mentioned before, one of the atomic survivors. Ken Williams and Barry Ether and Robert Holland from 10th Light Horse are in the vehicles today.
We also have Owen Longeran from 619 Squadron, Bomber Command RAF, and he's accompanied by Graham Martin, who's 96 years of age, from the 2nd 26th Battalion, and also Arthur Leggett's in there as well.
And Arthur's turns 100, or he's 100 now. I think he's 101 coming up, 2nd 11th Battalion, POW on Crete. And the veteran cars follow the Jeeps, of course, and they're carrying other veterans who normally wouldn't be able to make it.
Albert Wilday just spotted there. King's Own Scottish Borderers, was a prisoner of war in the salt mines in Germany and also flew in the Battle of Arnhem.
Yes, there's that King's Own Scottish Borderers cap badge there. Quite right. Look, a range of veterans there. Cyril Allender, 99 years of age, 100 in November. And that's useful, having the names on the side there too. It's a lovely touch for the people to know who they are.
And we really need to mention Neil McPherson. He was a Japanese prisoner of war. He's aged 96. He's in the vehicles there somewhere. He served with the 2nd Pioneer Battalion for part of the 8th Division, and he slaved away on the Burma-Thai railways there.
And some of the women we saw, Jan Banks and Avis Kenny and Owen Banks and Lorelei Rose, were all RANs, Women's Royal Australian Naval Service. There you go. And look lovely in their hats and uniforms. I remember when they're on parade, they always look particularly smart as well. And Les Wern, training Canada to become a pilot, and he turns 100 in August. I wish him all the very best. It's amazing about the longevity of these veterans. Dave Evans, RAAF World War II, and a former Minister for Agriculture, served as an aircrew gunner in Southwest Pacific.
Saw Roy Sims a moment ago, World War II in the Pacific and Malaysia, in the RAAF, served with the Americans in some highly secretive operations as well.
Yes, look, there's a real mixed bag. I mean, you could just imagine the stories that these people could tell. And look, we would really hope and encourage, and this comes from a military history point of view and the Army Museum point of view, that they document their stories for their families. Just take time to jot a few notes down or do an oral history on your grandmother or grandparents, because they have a story to tell and we don't want that story lost.
It's the Town of Victoria Park Brass Band. Always very recognisable in their bright red jackets. Actually have the insignia of 460 Bomber Squadron. They did have for a long time, and I believe they still do, on the jackets. They were asked to wear it by the squadron because every year in the Anzac Day parade they were the closest band to them, and the Bomber Squadron knew it would ensure that that insignia would always be seen on Anzac Day. So there they are, the Town of Victoria Park Brass Band.
And they are followed closely by the Naval Association of Western Australia, and they carry a banner with the battle honours from World War II to the present day. And their logo is once Navy, always Navy. And their main aim is to foster comradeship between naval associations and their own members, and to just keep the flame of the Navy continuing.
I think just some other past members that we've lost this year. Brigadier Bill Jamieson, OAM, a World War II veteran in Korea and Vietnam with the Royal Australian Infantry Corps, and former commander of 5th Military District in WA, and founder of the Army Museum of WA back in 1977. Alan Jennings, a World War II signaller, again a former volunteer at the museum. And Dr. Wojciech Gorski, OAM, very well known amongst the Polish ex-service group as well, sadly passed away.
Start to see more of the banners. Just spotted the Rands we mentioned before. Just there they are, just to the right of your screen.
Yeah, so the Rands led by Coral De Vere today as well. They were formed in 1941. They were disbanded for a little while in 1951. And anyway, they started serving on ships from 1983. So it's good to see that the Navy leading the way there on diversity.
And you can see the deployments under the Royal Australian Navy, the Albatross in Sydney and Melbourne. They've united as sort of one particular group. And of course, the ships' names stay. They have the Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3. So as one ship's decommissioned, another ship's takes on the name.
See the Canberra Association there as well. The Hobart Association will be marching today, we're told.
Yes, and they've morphed through a number of ships. The Hobart's had 3 ships, one in World War II, a DDG in Vietnam, and as well as a current DDG serving with the Navy.
And there's the Perth Association. HMAS Perth National Association based here in WA. 20 of them marching today.
Yes, and
banner's been held by Navy cadets.
Sure. And in World War II, they served in the Atlantic, the Malta convoys, the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, it was lost in the Sunda Strait in 1942 to Japanese action.
I think it's wonderful with the style of banners too these days, Steve, you know, where they have their battle honours on it and their different deployments, so it's very easily recognised by those that attend the parade in the terrace itself. And remind us all of their service and sacrifice, as every service has RAN, Army and RAAF.
Perth Metro Pipe Band. Started in 2006. Over 50 playing members across 3 different bands. You see more of the banners up the terrace. It's terrific to have your company today on ABC television. This is the Perth Anzac Day March and Commemorative Service.
And there we have the communications branch of the Navy, led by David McLean. He's the president of the WA chapter. And they were formed in 1946, and they've served right throughout to modern day. Tribal class submarines, the Arunta, Warramunga and the Bataan. Warramunga in particular saw a lot of service in Korea, up the Han estuary, and had a very rough go of it up there, but performed exceedingly well.
So bambooing the Burma Star.
And there we go. We have the N-class destroyers, the Nizam, Napier. Yeah, that's another one.
The Nestor, the Norman, and the Nepal, which was originally the Norseman.
There we go. And again, they served in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, Pacific, Southern and Indian Oceans, and have 25 battle honours between them.
And again, you'll see more of the families marching in honour of their perhaps grandfathers and fathers as that group reaches an age where they can no longer march.
And we see the Bataan there, another served in Korea with distinction. And something else to mention, that there's an Anzac frigate currently serving under the name of HMAS Warramunga.
Behind the tribal class destroyers, you can see the Churchlands Senior High School Senior Band, one of their 2 bands today, as they march past.
And the banner behind them is the RAN Clearance Divers Association. They were established in 1951, served in Malaysia, Vietnam, Gulf War, Somalia, East Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan, and they do have a number of roles within the SF community today.
And that is a very tough job.
Absolutely.
And SF is Special Forces.
Special Forces, of course, yes.
So there's a Vietnam veteran of the Navy. And as Steve's mentioned before, a number of them will have Korean war veterans, as well as those who also served during the Malayan emergency offshore and in the Indonesian confrontation offshore in the northern seas of Borneo.
Tingarea is a training establishment based in New South Wales. Many a sailor's gone through there. And they're led today by Paul Kalzajic. He's a leading seaman photographer with the ship, and served at Lewin as well as other places.
So we had the Far Eastern Strategic Reserve Navy Association on parade today. Now formed in 2002, and again these are those ones that look after the Malayan emergency period in the Indonesian confrontation. So into the Army side now, there's the Royal Australian Armoured Corps Association led by Ken Ashman, and the Armoured Corps being the senior Army service. 10th Light Horse being represented there, also obviously covering their battle honours and traditions from the Boer War into World War I. And again, some losses with 10th Light Horse. The former early 1970s CO, Lieutenant Colonel John Deacon, RFDED, passed away, as did a former OC of the early 1980s, Major Brian Gibson, RFD. Within the Armoured Corps, you've got the 1st Armoured Regiment with the tanks, the Centurion tanks, and also 3rd Cavalry Regiment as well. They were the APCs, so that carried the infantry. And the Armoured Corps are celebrating a massive 50th anniversary, particularly this year, of the Battle of Bin Ba, which is one of the few occasions our soldiers were involved in urban or built-up operations away from the jungle environment. And it was an all-day battle which involved 1st Armoured Regiment, 3rd Cavalry Regiment, and also elements of 5th Battalion Royal Australia Regiment on their 2nd tour. And a West Australian, Peter Strudwick, a national serviceman, again the Military Medal for Gallantry at the Battle of Bin Ba. One of only 2 military medals to the Royal Australian Armoured Corps APCs, and Mick Rainey gained a military medal for another action with the 1st Armoured Regiment tanks.
And we're seeing the Royal Australian Regiment, Royal Australian Artillery Association coming up. Now, they trace their roots back to 1870 in Western Australia as the Union Troop of Western Australian Volunteers. And the Artillery Historical Society run the Leighton Barrack Heritage Site at Mosman Park, which is open on Sundays. So there they are, and we're here, 106 Field Battery. So 106, I think it said 106.
Well, they're the Vietnam sort of era batteries that went up there, firing the L5s and the M2A2s. See the Scorpion badge of the Armoured 3rd Cavalry Regiment.
And there we see the Royal Australian Engineers, served everywhere from World War I through to today, and particularly in Vietnam with the Tunnel Rats from 1 Field Squadron. A very dangerous job indeed. Oh, and there we go, there was a Tunnel Rats banner just there. 2nd 7th Australian Field Regiment, part of 9th Division that served in the Middle East, and then moved on to New Guinea and the Borneo campaigns, and most represented today mostly by family members.
And they have the traditional artillery and engineers, the blue and red colours as their core colours. And again, their service is largely Vietnam here, although I see a medal group for World War I with a military medal in it being worn by one of their relatives. No doubt commemorating an honoured gunner within their family.
The Royal Australian Survey Corps.
Yes, we all need a decent map, and you know, fantastic at doing that, and that's a job. I think they've disbanded now, possibly, and they've moved into the engineers.
Yes. They were formed very early on and went through World War I and II, and did a lot of work around the place. And of course, with them, the amalgamation with from the engineers as well.
Behind them we saw the Royal Australian Signals Association as well.
Yes, their motto, Certa Cito, swift and sure, and they were born out of the engineers as well. And they lost my first RSM, Eddie Renton, last year, and I remember him fondly as a 17-year-old back in 1977.
So mostly honouring their relatives with those World War II battalions, because obviously they're into their 90s, the actual veterans themselves. 16 Battalion Association, they were part of 13 Brigade, not to be confused with the 2nd 16th. And again, one of the middle banners, we see the green one with the white over blue. That is 16th Battalion colours. And 11th Battalion brown over blue with the A in it. That represents A for Anzac. They were Gallipoli landers on the first day in the morning there at 4:30 in the morning, part of 3rd Brigade. So now the units honour both their First World War heritage and their Second World War heritage as units. And you'll find a lot of units doing that now. 16th Battalion being honoured by the 2nd 16th. And here we have them here.
And we should mention Jim Moore and Reg Newman, who passed away recently. They both served in Syria, Kokoda and Borneo. Basically the full book for the 2nd 16th Battalion. Saw some hard yards on. And there we have being led by
Bill Grade.
Bill Grade,
yep.
AM. Now, Bill's a wonderful chap. In fact, he'll be at the football match on Saturday night, Dockers and Bulldogs, and he'll be giving the ode.
Yeah, 99 going on 100. Just amazing sort of fellow. Still got a handshake like a vice, I can tell you. And he fought right through from Syria against the Vichy French in 1941. He was on the Kokoda track, Shaggy Ridge and the Markham Ramu valleys, and then on to Borneo. So he did the whole 9 yards.
Worth also mentioning for people watching on, people marching with medals on both breasts, their families.
That's correct.
And indeed their own.
Their own. They're the recipients of their own, but on the right-hand side, their family members. And we'll see more of that as time goes on. The Swan Regiment drums and pipes. And this is a unit that really came under the watchful eye of the 2nd 28th and 24th Anti-Tank Company Associations, and hence the armband they wear. And our 2nd 28th and 24th Anti-Tank Company Associations.
And we should mention J.J. Wade, an absolute stalwart of the 2nd 28th Battalion, passed away last year at age 100. Also, Fred Exley, WX7107, a very early enlistee. He died in May or June of 2018. They were members of 9th Division and proudly wear the T for Tobruk. And then they went on to serve in Borneo and such.
Speaking of the T for Tobruk, there it is again.
That's right. So that was a special honour for the famous siege, and there's the 2nd 32nd Battalion. So there's the famous T. Was honoured after the siege of Tobruk, a successful defence against Rommel's Afrika Korps. Australians served there from July 1941 right through to December 1941, and then were withdrawn, and then fought again at the Battle of El Alamein. There's a veteran there with his Pacific Star group. That's that yellowy ribbon with the red centre, and then the next one, a bit of a greenish ribbon, is the Pacific Star. So a person who's fought in the Middle East against the Afrika Korps and the Italian Army, and then gone on to the Pacific. See the T at the end of that. That's the special, unofficial, but very highly regarded Tobruk medal. T for Tobruk. Rats of Tobruk.
Why do you say unofficial?
Well, there's those that are issued by the government, and there's others that have come up later by associations and things like that. And so we do see that from time to time.
And the 2nd 43rd has just marched by. We should mention Bill Mitchell. He passed away in August 18. He was one of the last rats of Tobruk, served at El Alamein where he was wounded, then he went on to New Guinea and Borneo.
And Lynette Starcevich is a stalwart member of the unit. Her father, Private Tom Starcevich, gained the Victoria Cross for the 2nd 43rd against the Japanese up in northern Borneo at Beaufort. And his Victoria Cross, along with another 3 Victoria Crosses, are in the collection of the Army Museum of Western Australia.
Little impromptu interview taking place.
That's right. So interesting, a World War II veteran with a modern commendation.
Yes, there were a number of those modern. He's probably from the 2nd, 3rd Pioneers, possibly, because they got some belated commendations awarded this year. 6 of them, in fact. But we'll talk about that when we see them march by.
Yes, so it's not unusual with the Australian honours system as opposed to the imperial system. We have our imperial medals, which went from the early states to 1975, and Australia introduced its own medal system. And so awards provided then become foreign awards. We have our own system, and so they've actually gone retrospectively to look at different units and award our own awards to them as well. So, yeah, Pacific veteran and well-deserved. Good on you, Digger. Second, 4th machine guns. That's a diamond-shaped badge. They were the units that were with the 8th Division and caught up in Singapore and became prisoners of war. So their experience was a nightmare experience after fighting very, very hard. For the defence of Singapore, it finally fell, and they were captured and did the nightmare experience of being a prisoner of the Japanese, the Burma Thai Railway, the terrible convoys taking them to Japan to work in the coal mines as slaves. A very, very tough story indeed for our 2nd, 4th machine gunners, and 2nd, 3rd and other prisoners of war. John Gilmore of the 2nd, 4th passed away, and he was the last of the 2nd, 4th's prisoners of war. A very famous WA middle distance runner and coach from the late 1940s was John.
Presbyterian Ladies College Pipes and Drums. Just helping to add to the atmosphere of what's been a terrific morning here in Perth.
The Royal Australian Regiment Association has just marched by, being led by Peter Heaney from the 2 RAR. Special shout out to Jack Babbage, who can't make it this year. He's ill at home, so g'day, Jack. And the RAR was formed in Japan and made up from the 65th, 66th, 67th battalions, thereby making 1, 2 and 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment. 5-7 RAR just marching by, a mechanised unit during the 80s. And here we have 4th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, 2 tours of Vietnam, and as well as moving on to other service such as Rwanda, etc.
And in terms of the banners, the very recognisable 5th Battalion.
Well, 5th Battalion with the Tiger Battalion, and we'll probably get a chance. And the DCM recipient I see there for Vietnam, the very rare award for Vietnam.
That'd be Mr. McNulty.
It could well be if he's in 5 Battalion. Yep, 2nd tour, 1969-70. And these are the grunts, in essence, Clint. The infantry, which it's a badge they wear with honour, being a grunt. It's the sound they make when they're putting their massive packs on. You lift your pack off the ground. You've been in the bush for 20 days in constant contact with the enemy. You get up again, you throw your pack on, you go, ugh. You grunt. And that's what they do, they grunt.
You see the grey 8 right at the very back?
Yes, that's the 8th Battalion Royal Australia Regiment. Former Governor and Governor-General of Australia, Michael Jeffrey, was a company commander with 8th Battalion.
We see the blue banner there of the 1st Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, served in Korea, Vietnam, and other modern campaigns.
And that was with their burgundy hats on. That's 7th Battalion, Royal Australia Regiment.
The Pigs. 7th Battalion, we should see people like Peter Lutley down there. And who else we got for the 7th?
Well, it used to be the Honourable Graham Edwards.
Oh, of
very
course.
famous, well-known member of 7th Battalion National Servicemen. There's 8th Battalion, the Grey 8.
And
I used with the 7th Battalion, Ken Bladen sadly passed away. Lieutenant Colonel Ken Bladen, a former company SAS man in the 50s. support company commander with 7 Battalion's first tour in Vietnam, and state president of the RSL, very highly regarded president, passed away in recent times. So Lieutenant Colonel Ken Bladen, AM.
It does happen, but unfortunately they cramped up a bit on each other. We didn't get to see much of the 5th Battalion banner today as we continue on with our coverage of the Anzac Day Parade of 2019 on ABC television. As we come now, the Royal Australian Navy Band, the Australian Commando Association, behind them the Double Diamonds.
Yes,
That's right.
Yes, Double Diamonds. Represented here in Western Australia, 2nd Commando Squadron, served in Timor in particular. We have New Guinea and New Britain. And of course, we need to mention Keith Hayes.
There's
Yes,
there
Keith.
was on screen for half a second. Sorry.
No, that was you spotted a family member.
I was about to say there's my my nephew walking there with the Double Diamonds.
Well, there you go, another good-looking bloke.
Better looking than me.
Second independent. I should mention that Keith Hayes sadly passed away. Keith was one of the most famous members of the unit, and is one of the last to survive. But he survived a massacre on Timor when they were captured, and his group were shot by the Japanese and bayoneted. He was actually shot and bayoneted, but survived, and went on to see further service.
And the SAS Association today, 50th anniversary for the 3 Squadron's 2nd tour of Vietnam. And we should mention one of the commanding officer, Reg Beasley, AM, passed away last year. And as well as Dan McDaniel. Dan was a National Service officer with 4 RAR, and he came into the SAS regiment in the late 70s. And Reg made him the first OC of 1 SAS CT squadron. So in the very formative days of CT operations, counter-terrorist operations. And from the northwest, from northern part of the state today, we have Jack Gebhardt visiting and marching. He served in Borneo with 1 squadron, 2 tours in Vietnam with 1 squadron, wounded on his first tour, and received a military medal on his 2nd tour.
And of course we saw there too with the SAS the distinctive Sand Berets and Wing Dagger. Who dares wins is their famous motto. Z Specials, who are representing the Special Forces of World War II and the forebears of the SAS.
And the training team banner, first in, last out. And we should mention Gary Sutherland, OAM, who passed away. He was a former RSM in the Army, served with the training team 70 to 71, and at one time acting CEO of RSL WA. Terry Armin is also marching with the training team. Oh, there he is on screen. He's representing his father, Ron, who served in the team 69 to 70. He also became an RSM, in fact, father and son RSMs. Terry spending its time in Vietnam with the Signals, and then moving on to the Armoured Corps and serving with 10th Light Horse.
So the Australian Intelligence Corps green banner with their badge.
Yes, Intelligence Corps. INT. You know, they're very formed in 1906, later disbanded to be reformed in 1939. They have an integral role in the Australian intelligence community at all levels today. First Australian Field Hospital, formed during the Vietnam years and served right up until the late 80s, where they were the principal medical facility for Australian operations overseas and exercises.
I see the 2nd, 7th banner up as well as the 2nd, 13th. 2nd, 7th were with the 6th Division, and that was Colonel Aswef, a very famous West Australian medical man, and his unit. They all captured on, mostly captured on Crete. He was virtually the Weary Dunlop of the European theatre as far as Australians and a lot of Allied servicemen in POW camps were concerned. Colonel Leslie Aswef.
City of Perth brass band there, and a few interested onlookers. Lots of Australian flags out today, as you'd expect. Crowds lining the streets of St George's Terrace here in Perth. Hope you're enjoying the coverage wherever you're watching around WA on ABC television. Clint Wilden alongside military historians Wayne Gardner and Steve Danaher today. Crowds have come out in big numbers again for the Perth Anzac Day Parade.
And here we have some of the other corps, the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps Association, led by Warren Evans, Lieutenant Colonel retired, with 22 years service, including service in Vietnam. And this particular group, is their motto is a good one too, to the warrior his arms, because without the support of ordnance and the like, the fighting person at the front line has no chance. And in ordnance you have Kevin Judge, Gary Hugo, MBE, and Kevin Graham. And this year's march recognises Mrs. Rosa Palmer, herself a RAOC soldier, widow of Brigadier Laurie Palmer, after whom Palmer Barracks in Guildford's named. So Rosa turns 94 this year, but is unable to march, but she's in our thoughts. The Royal Australian Electrical Mechanical Engineers wouldn't follow close behind, the Spanners. There was the Pay Corps in today as well, and this is the Provo Corps with their red berets. They're the military police. And they have an interesting history, the police, of course, the military police, and their official history, they actually called the other enemy. So I suppose with our soldiers have, when they go astray a bit, the military police are called in and have to do what police do. There's the RACS Association, very smart in their RAC green colours there, I must say, and their traditional RAC hats.
That's the Women's Royal Australia Army Corps.
That's right, Clint, yes. And there's the Skyville. This is the group of national servicemen who were selected especially as officers to train in Skyville. It's a 22-week intensive training course. Skyville was up in, where's that, in Sydney's north, western outskirts, between 65 and 73. And of 2,700 selected, 1,871 graduated, and many going in to serve as officers in Vietnam and also staying in Australia. There's John O'Halloran there, 6th Battalion Royal Australia Regiment First Tour, and in B Company, platoon commander, MID, and his platoon was one of the most decorated platoons in Vietnam. Very proud of his platoon is John. Good to see him marching.
The Australian Red Cross.
Yes, well, they're everywhere, aren't they, Clint? You know, we need them, and they're not only on war service at times, but also 24/7 within the community. Marvellous organisation, and they've been marching for years within the parade, of course.
And then there's a little bit of a gap, as often does occur, for the WA Police Pipe Band, making their way around for a second time. A chance to talk about a few of the notable anniversaries.
Yes, fine. Look, we've mentioned the big Battle of Leyte Gulf when the Navy came through earlier on, one of the largest battles in world history. But also this year is the 75th anniversary of Operation Remem, which was a special forces operation to go and destroy Japanese ships in Singapore Harbour. This was from 11th of September to 6th of October 1944, and it left, they were trained on Garden Island here in Western Australia and left from Shark Bay, and this was a highly successful operation and damaging and sinking Japanese ships up there. So it showed the Japanese weren't immune even in those dark days of war. With the Australian Army, the Battle of Shaggy Ridge is commemorated in New Guinea, 19th to the 31st of January 1944 with the 7th Division, which include WA's famous 2nd 16th Battalion, who took a prominent part, and Cyril Allender, who I mentioned earlier in the hospital cars, fought at Kokoda and also at Shaggy Ridge. And on the other eastern coast, just from New South Wales, was the Japanese prisoners of war camp breakout at Cowra on the 5th of August 1944 when the Japanese made mass escapes.
And here we see the Royal Australian Air Force Association, known as RAFA, and they're led by Clive Robertson, AMLG this year. And we must mention Alex Kerr, AM, who passed away earlier on in 2019, an absolute stalwart of the chap. Yeah,
he was a 16th Battalion Cameron Highlanders original member, and then went on to Air Force service, was shot down and became a prisoner of war, and then became founding professor of economics, then Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Murdoch University. And we just see the Bomber Command veterans march by, and of course horrendous casualties during the offensives over Europe. Australia sent 10,000 crew, of whom 4,000 were killed, and 80% of Australians flew in the RAF mixed squadrons, in addition to the 5 heavy bomber squadrons. That'd be 460, 462, 463, 466 and 467 squadrons. And you see a family member wearing the medals there on the right, as we've mentioned a number of times today, with the Distinguished Flying Cross, awarded for immediate gallantry or for an end of tour of their 30 operations. And just recently, Bomber Command got acknowledged by actually having a clasp after all these years, some 80 years later, getting a clasp Bomber Command to their medal. 25 Squadron, City of Perth Squadron, the Royal Australian Air Force Active Reserve, originally formed in Victoria in May 37. They flew B-24 Liberators during the war, and they're based at RAF Base Pearce. So World War I and World War II medals being worn there. Pathfinder Squadron banner that we see there, or Pathfinders, an extremely dangerous job. They went in early to drop flares and such, so the main bomber force behind them could
identify their targets, and a very dangerous activity for the Pathfinder boys.
Often the Pathfinders were the most experienced crews as well, although some of the better flyers were then allocated to them, and they did play a very prominent part in the more accurate marking and therefore the bombing of strategic targets in Germany during the war. But still highly dangerous. The German Luftwaffe night defences were extremely strong, and casualties were suffered right through till the very last day of World War II in 1945.
We also saw the RAAF Police Association, and for the second time around, the WA Fire and Emergency Services concert band.
And number 3 Telecommunications Unit Association has just marched by, led by Heather Robertson. Until its closure in 1991, they're based at Pearce. They held the unchallenged distinction of being the longest-serving, fully operational unit in the RAAF, operating 24/7 for 43 years.
Yes, it's just not about the fighting services or the people at the front line. There's a lot going on behind, the logistics side of it, the intelligence side of it, the signalling gathering, the planning, the headquarters command elements, a lot going on.
And looks like we have the WAFs there, the Women's Australian Air Force Association, and of course, you know, the sterling work that they do. Back in the day, a lot of them, they didn't serve overseas, but very important roles within Australia defence community.
And again, these days the women are now, Steve, you know, come straight into the services and are allocated straight into their different corps and things, and we see that a lot now. There's the Australian Ex-Service Atomic Survivors Association. It was formed of ex-service members who were participants in the British nuclear testing carried out in Australia during the 1950s and 60s. And although their medical issues weren't evident then, they've certainly become more evident as they got older.
Yeah, Vietnam Veterans Association, it's a large group of all those that don't belong to the RAR and other kindred groups. So we've got a whole array of different corps and of services there with the gentlemen marching. But must make mention of Rod McClellan today of C Company 9 RAR. His father served in the 2nd 4th Machine Gun Battalion, and Rod was very active in that association, and particularly because his father's association, and that's the father, Chris McClellan.
And that's what you see, father and son supporting each other for all those decades in ex-service associations.
It's the voice of military historian Wayne Gardner. Alongside him, military historian Steve Danaher, with you today for the 2019 Anzac Day Parade and Commemorative Service on ABC Television. Clint Wilden with you as well. Great you could join us on what's been a marvellous morning here in Perth.
And here we're seeing the Honouring Indigenous War Graves Association, led by Mr John Schnars, OAM. He's been responsible for instigating over 200 headstones in Western Australia of otherwise unmarked graves of our Indigenous population. And in November this year, a memorial to Indigenous folk from Bruce Rock will be opened on 2nd of November. So if you can make it to Bruce Rock, please go there and support your
the units
Western
and organisations.
Yes. Absolutely.
So into the modern ex-service men and women. The Defence Reserves Association, these are the CMF and Army Reserve members from different units from the part-time soldiers. Some of them had regular Army service as well. And they represent also a variety of corps and units that were either part-time or militia. National Serviceman with his very distinctive National Service medals. And here we have our contingents from overseas, and our friends from across the ditch.
Yes, the New Zealanders, and we see the New Zealanders ex-service men and women's association just marched by, as well as the New Zealand Naval Association. Kiwis have served alongside us, or we're alongside them, since World War II and even earlier, the Boer War.
Well, I think the banner says it all, Steve, doesn't it? You know, Gallipoli to Afghanistan. The New Zealanders also gained a Victoria Cross recipient in Afghanistan. And they have, we have our slouch hats, and they have what they call their pork pie type of hats. Again, a very distinctive New Zealand headdress.
Royal New Zealand Navy was formed under the Royal Assent of King George VI in 1941. prior then, the New Zealand Navy was a division of the Royal Navy from 1921, operating under the auspice of the Naval Defence Act 1913.
Keep in mind too that the Army Museum of WA is open especially today between 11 and 3 o'clock, with last entry at 1:30, and if veterans attend wearing their medals, they'll be in for free, and of course all ex-service personnel are in, there's no admittance fee charged. We're located in Burt Street, Fremantle, at Historic Artillery Barracks, so you're most welcome there today. George Nielsen. George is interesting. He was the chappie who was with the Cameronians, and he was in South Arabia and Kenya.
And there we have the Airborne Forces, UK Airborne Forces, by their distinctive red berets and para wings, etc. Marching, they've served, and we see a combination of British and Australian service there.
Royal Fusiliers with a hackle.
North American veterans, a number of them living here in Western Australia, decided to retire on the right side of the world and marching proudly wearing their distinctive headdress.
Yeah, led by Commander Chris Butler, and there's Irving Lane is there, and Philippe Zaragoza. Rob Mitchell will be marching today, Charles Erickson and Barry Taylor.
Descendants of World War II Chinese Defence Force. You must remember them. A bit on the quiet side during World War II from our perspective, because we didn't see what was going on, but fought very hard and tenaciously against the Japanese.
Yes, lost millions of Chinese, but some 14 million Chinese died during those campaigns in China and Manchuria.
And the Greek Australian Ex-Services Association, led by Bill Evangel, President, and wearing the medals of his late father Christos, a decorated Korean War veteran.
So again, the campaigns and the stories that are covered by these overseas groups are just remarkable.
And there we see the Indian Defence Force Association. And the association facilitates the visits of Indian naval ships in WA ports, hosts the officers and men of the visiting Indian naval ships when they come here for a bit of R&R.
There's the 7-wing Air Force Cadet Drums Corps doing a bit of drill on the in the terrace. Well done to them.
Very impressive.
Bold, isn't it?
Don't forget, after this march, we'll head to the Perth Concert Hall for the Commemorative Service, and then go to Gallipoli, the dawn service there, and then at 1 o'clock today here in W After Views, Breton.
And the Korean Ex-Service Association. They're marching down the terrace now towards us. Now, the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, saw over 1 million casualties. It is still undergoing a very uneasy ceasefire between North and South Korea. And it was the first test for the United Nations after World War II. And some very proud Koreans there marching today. And here comes the Poles, the Polish Ex-Servicemen and Families Association, led by Kaz Marek. There he is at the front there. Served from Vietnam right through to East Timor and beyond. So he's a long-time SAS member.
Amazing service.
Absolutely, I've known Kaz for a long time,
East Timor.
and hell of a nice man. So 2 squadrons of the Polish fighters flew during the Battle of Britain as well. We've got to remember they got out of out of Europe, and wanted to aid the war effort, and the Poles put in a huge effort there.
Well, they were the beginning there. 80 years ago, in 1939, they were there at the very beginning when their country was overrun. So they were fighting before we even put our hands up to come into the war.
Now we have the Rhodesian Service Association, led by John Pritchard, Colonel from 2 RAR, and that's Rhodesian African Rifles. When the Second World War broke out, they were a bit like Australia. They sent troops and assistance to the mother country of Britain, as it was at the time. They also served in the Malayan campaign, and of course they had the Rhodesian Bush War in the 60s and 70s.
And one of the members calling the step, and no doubt he'd be a former RSM.
I would think so.
I would think so. Once an RSM, always an RSM.
Explain RSM.
Regimental Sergeant Major.
For viewers who just tuned in.
And the South African Military Veterans Association of Australia are marching today. One of the unknown aspects of the South African conflicts was they fought the largest tank battle since World War II in 1987 against the Angolans, and they used their Raytel 90 armoured fighting vehicles up against T-55 tanks.
Yeah,
so really outgunned, but won the day.
Okay, that's these different units bring that sort of information to the table, that we're very versant with our own history from our Boer War days right through to current operations, but the veterans who are now part of our community bring a whole different story from those remote parts of Africa, stories that we don't hear about, which are very big in their stories. You know, all the Delville wood for the South Africans is what Gallipoli is to us. So they have their own traditions and battle honours, and it's really marvellous to have the opportunity to learn about their stories as well, which they're very happy to share. And this won't be lost when we see the Sikh community in today's parade either.
So people of all ages have come down for the Anzac Day Parade of 2019, taking whatever vantage point they've been able to find. Saw a couple on Dad's shoulders earlier on. Nice to see those being sun smart as well. The floppy hats on. It's been a wonderful morning here in Perth. Reminder, stay with us. The commemorative service coming up here on ABC television. The flags being waved. People getting into the spirit of the day. Such an important day in the character of the nation. Those that have made their way down to the Perth CBD, enjoying what they're seeing.
And there's some other commemorations to think of. We can't forget about the RAAF in World War II, the Battle of the Ruhr, the industrial heart of Germany, March 1943 to October 1944, bombing the industrial heartland there. Battle of Berlin, November 1943 to 44.
More of those in just a moment. This is the WA Sikh Band. They've been participating in the Anzac Day Parade, or it was, since 2007. This is the WA Sikh Community marching behind them.
And they have served in conflicts such as World War I in Afghanistan and China, World War I again, Gallipoli, Egypt, France, Flanders, Palestine, Persia, Mesopotamia, Northwest Frontier, and in World War II, Burma, Malaya, Iraq, North Africa and Greece. So a huge contribution to the British Empire at the time.
And the Commonwealth. And of course, they were the biggest volunteer army in the world, the Indian Army. Gaining their independence and Pakistan independence in 1947.
Behind them, the Vietnamese ex-servicemen, the Republic of Vietnam Veterans Association. You see them on your screen now.
Yes, Vietnam was occupied in World War II by the Japanese, and since then they were in conflict up until 1975 with the first French Indochina War, 46 to 54, followed by what was called the Second Vietnam War, 55 to 73. And then North Vietnam invaded the South in 1975, which saw the capitulation of Saigon, and I think it was the 25th of April 75, if memory serves me right, when the tanks bowled through the gates of the presidential palace.
Very famous sight, that particular one, that tank pushing down those gates and going in. End of a terrible conflict, a long conflict. All the various wars that Vietnam was involved in.
I was fortunate enough to go to Vietnam last year. Went to the northern part, and just to see how the country has prospered since the war days. I went there in '93 as well, and to see the difference, and it's remarkable the change of the country.
The relatives of deceased veterans, and there was a chap carrying a portrait, but it also had his World War I medals with a Distinguished Conduct Medal for gallantry just below the Victoria Cross, the DCM.
The Scouts Association of Australia, that's the WA branch there, one of the world's leading youth organisations for the past 112 years. In their start in England in the early 1900s, established in most nations around the world, and also, along with them, the Girl Guides of WA, member organisation of Girl Guides Australia. Of course, the World Association of Girl Guides, a membership of over 10 million girls and women across 145 countries. And then another chance to have a look at 7-Wing Air Force Cadets Drum Corps and the motorcycle clubs.
And here we go. Members of the Military Brotherhood, Veterans Motorcycle Club, the Patriots and others. And I know for a fact that the Military Brotherhood are fantastic at fundraising for various charities throughout Western Australia, Legacy in particular. So we thank them for that. And these guys do just enjoy riding their motorcycles, and they are veterans. And I've ridden with the Brotherhood group myself. There we see he looks like a policeman with what he's wearing on his chest.
I'd say so, Steve, yeah. Blue Beret for Cyprus, and he's East Timor.
Yes.
Service as well. And they'll have overseas service as well as part-time seamen for Army Reserve Service. There was a time when the motorcycles were in the parade some decades ago, but they're back into it, and good to see a representation there by that veteran community.
It's a nice way to wrap things up, I think. Motorcycles at the back.
Yeah, well, they certainly bring some new information to the coverage and to the public viewing, of course. and again, understanding what they're wearing as well helps, obviously, the people who are viewing to see and understand their service more clearly.
There's an example of the blue beret you spoke about.
Absolutely, and he's wearing his UN Cyprus medal, and that's the 55th anniversary, as mentioned earlier. So obviously a participant there with the police force.
There'll probably be more motorcycles in future years as they see this happening, and it'll probably build a bit. Also, with the UN, Steve, too, you know, they wear these loud colours and obvious colours because they are peacekeepers. They're not there to be camouflaged and hidden away. So, like when our troops went into Bougainville, there was yellow. They wore yellow wide brim hats, yellow vests. They carried yellow umbrellas. And these were our servicemen and women because they were there for peace and bringing the community together. So this year, to finish the parade, apparently, Clint, the hospital cars are coming around for a second time because they're actually going to then park in the terrace near the concert hall, so their frail passengers can then easily walk to the concert hall and enjoy the proceedings for the rest of the morning.
Well, that's a very sensible way
I agree. It's a
end
good
proceedings, because we are talking about people who we really want to see in the best positions at the Perth Concert Hall for the commemorative service. So to bring them around again, it gives a second chance for those that have lined the streets to say thank you for what they've done, and also to make sure that they've got a prime parking position, which they most certainly deserve.
So a Korean War veteran there, Australian.
And we must say thanks to the drivers who have offered their time and vehicles to transport the veterans here. And I did notice Graham McEwen driving one of the vehicles just then.
Yeah, Graham's been in the march virtually from the very earliest days for well over 20 years. And Cassandra, who organises it all, it's a marvellous job that they do. A lot involved, obviously the logistics to get the different veterans together, and that's Graham's larger car there. But getting the veterans together so they can participate still, very keen to do so.
Now there's our Intelligence Corps man, Brian Dawson. Expected him to be actually leading the Intelligence Corps today, but he's taken the easy way out in the front seat.
Oh, there he is, and obviously happy enjoyed a chat. He's got his Reserve Force decoration up too, so he's a former officer in the Int Corps and long serving.
I was going to say we'd try and sneakily have a listen to what Brian had to say then. Chatted away with our cameraman. Nice bit of work downstairs from those gentlemen involved.
Well, he wouldn't have given away any secrets, Clint, that's for sure.
No, too right. No, very true. And the ladies mostly with the Rands, as we mentioned earlier on.
Likes of Jan Banks, Owen Banks, Avis Kenny.
Exactly.
As they make their way towards preferential parking.
And for years, in decades, they would have marched with all their mates and friends, and time takes its toll, and now they're still able to participate in this form.
Saw John Richards a moment ago. Flew Lancaster bombers over Germany, France and Russia, 96 years of age.
Now, these got the Legion of Honour, which was given by the French government to our World War II veterans fairly recently. He wears the France and Germany star as well, and the Bomber Command clasp to his group, which is newly awarded, recognising Bomber Command veterans.
So there was John Richards there. Alongside him, Roy Sims, as I mentioned, fought Pacific and Malaysia in World War II as part of the RAAF, served with the Americans in a number of highly secretive operations. We saw him go through the first time around as well. What a wonderful morning. Well done to everyone who made their way down to the Perth CBD. Make sure that they got a good view of the Anzac Day Parade of 2019. So the march, having passed, or in some cases rolled by, the saluting dais, now begins to disperse down at Langley Park. And then they'll head across to the Perth Concert Hall for the commemorative service. Coming up on ABC television, we'll show you the dawn service from Gallipoli. We'll move on to France and the memorial also at Villers Bretonneux, and of course there'll be a special presentation too of ABC News at 7 o'clock. April 25 is of course a day of commemorations, and across the state these events started early at dawn. Perth Concert Hall, where very shortly we'll be heading to the Commemorative Service. People make their way down St George's Terrace after watching the Anzac Day Parade, or those involved who dispersed on Langley Park head back towards the Concert Hall. We'll take you there for the entire Commemorative Service, hosted by the ABC's Jeff Hutchison very shortly. Also coming up, we'll show you the dawn service from Gallipoli, and then we'll move on to France, as I mentioned, and the memorial at Villers-Bretonneux, and then stay with ABC Television throughout the day. A full wrap of everything that happened today, both here in Perth, around the nation, and indeed right around the world. At 7 o'clock with James McHale. Incredible. So Anzac Day, the most important day, of course, in the RSL calendar. That's stating the obvious, perhaps, but what may not be so obvious is the RSL's reason for being. Quite simply, it's a support organisation for men and women who've served or are serving in the Defence Force, and not forgetting their families. At war's end, these soldiers, sailors and airmen can come home. And coming home wasn't always easy, if at all.
Susan Grace has a story to tell about her father.
He was a mix. He was a lot of the time great fun. He was a larrikin, but he came back from the war with a lot of rage, a lot of anger.
The events she'll talk about were at the time probably misunderstood. Certainly, they were rarely mentioned.
We three children grew up with that, but growing up with it, it felt normal.
It all starts when Susan's father, Colin Wheatley, went to war. The second one. 460 Squadron was his eventual destination. He was a kid, really, just 18, and part of Bomber Command.
And I think it sounded exciting to be going overseas to fight. Of course, he would have had no notion at all what that was going to mean.
Colin Wheatley trained in Britain and straight away was in the air, a gunner.
They were usually sent out to bomb a particular target, a gunnery or an aircraft factory or particular area or particular building. And that was their job. They would drop their bombs and all they would see was flashes of light.
460 dropped more bombs than any other Australian squadron. One of their missions was to destroy a factory near Switzerland.
He described it as being fairly easy. They came in for a bit of flak and the pilot was dodging that, swerving from right to left, and they were doing very well until finally everything just exploded. He said it was as if 1,000 guns had just gone off. The searchlights caught the planes and all the guns went off, and he said it was just like sheer madness. They had to fly across France and across the Channel on 3 engines and arrived home with, as Dad describes, a cap full of fuel. I suspect at that age he didn't have the imagination to fully take in emotionally what they were doing to the people on the ground. And I'm not sure I would have, at the age of 18, 19, 20 either.
Colin Wheatley came back to Australia on his 21st birthday.
The boy who came home, I didn't know at that point. I was born in 1950, so I came along a few years later. But I certainly grew up with him as a young man, and he was quite volatile. He was, on good days, he was really good fun and generous, a very generous man. But he could flip very quickly into a rage, and his rage would know no bounds, and it would just go until it was spent. And if that meant physical violence against we children, it would just go until his rage was spent.
In the 50s, the family moved to Salisbury in Brisbane, which was full of war service families like theirs.
All of our fathers were of similar ages, so we were of similar ages too. And they also had fathers who had come home with war trauma, with, I just used to call it war anger. I didn't know what else to call it as a child. And I used to hear what was going on in their house, and because it was going on in our house too, with a lot of verbal and physical violence, it was very normal. I never had a feeling that he did this because he hated me or didn't love me. I always had a sense that there was a love there that he didn't know how to express, that had been stolen. When I see the men who have come back from our most recent wars, it looks very similar, and I keep looking and I think, that's what Dad was like. That's what Dad must have been feeling. That's what Dad must have been experiencing. Only he had no one to name it, and then there was no help available because all the men had come home. They were just expected to marry, have families, and get on with life. I think probably it was a mix for Dad. He may well have had a fairly volatile personality as well, and mixed with that was coming home with what we now call PTSD.
The 60th anniversary of D-Day was marked in France with ceremony and medals. Colin Wheatley was there, on the ground this time.
Is this a very emotional moment for you?
Yes. I didn't expect it to be, but it is. That's why I'm wiping my eyes all the time.
I never heard him speak about survivor guilt that we now talk about, but he was certainly very aware of mates that never came home. It took him until he was a grandfather before he started to talk about that. But when they were flying wingtip to wingtip and the plane next to him would be shot out of the sky, I think that was quite shocking for him as a young man. I never heard him say, "I wish I hadn't done it," but I certainly saw him bearing the weight of that responsibility and an enormous sadness, He certainly learned to realise the utter stupidity of war, of any war.
Mental health, you can't see it. You know, if you see someone having a meltdown or whatever, don't just assume that they're some sort of freak. There could be more to it.
When the subject matter is delicate,
David,
here's a tip.
Nice to meet you.
come armed.
Got you a cake?
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Because you said that, what was that you said about yourself? That
A fat bastard doesn't pass up cake.
Let's go in.
With kids at school and wife Ange at work, Dane Greenstreet is on home duties. But life hasn't always been so suburban. When Dane was 17, he joined the army.
I've seen a lot of the world. I've done a lot of cool things. Like my 18th birthday, I got to spend my 18th birthday shooting a machine gun for the first time ever, so I thought that was pretty cool for a young lad from the country.
If that was a positive, there were also negatives. In East Timor, a bus goes over a cliff.
They brought a young girl up. She was about the same age as me, and there were some of the locals carrying her up, and I went to help carry her, and I grabbed onto her lower right leg, and her knee was just like sort of from about 2 inches above her knee to about 6 inches below was just jelly. Like I grabbed it and it just sort of collapsed backwards, and that was pretty bad. And then I just sat with her and kept an eye on her, and she died while I was there.
In Afghanistan, Dane guards civilian contractors.
I was the guy looking at all the corners, making sure all the exits were okay, like, you know, looking at all those little things. And I was also trying to do the same job as these other guys too. So, like, I'm trying to ask relevant questions while looking behind me as well. So that did certainly impact my anxiety, but yeah, certainly nothing like a lot of the other guys.
Dane was in the army for 16 years, 8 months and 1 day. Only in 2016 was his condition diagnosed: PTSD, depression and anxiety. He'd been suffering since 2002.
It's like a noise in your head. It's like your brain starts picking on your self-worth, like you're useless, you can't do this, you can't do that. You're a lousy dad, you're a useless husband, you can't even go to work anymore. And then all of a sudden it becomes all-consuming. All you can think of is how useless you are, how much of a drain on everything you are, how much better, you know, your family's life and stuff would be without you around. I go very introverted. I shut off from everyone. I'll function through the day to the bare minimum, but that is it.
No violence?
No violence, no. I do get angry, but never any violence, no. When I was discharged from the army, I was medically retired. So at this stage, I do not work, and I have no pressure on me to work. So.
You're 36 though, right?
36, yep.
And the rest of your life you don't have to work or won't work or can't work?
Can't work, yeah. Not that I don't want to, I'd love to go back to work.
Dane Greenstreet presents as a fit young man. He loves motorbikes and is a very strong swimmer. He could be a poster boy for Australian dads, but is not.
The people who I've made friends with, they are all aware of my situation. But then, you know, it's always that awkward period when you meet new people, and it's like the third question that comes out of most people's mouth is, what do you do for a living?
Exactly.
And me as a 36-year-old, until recently, I haven't known how to answer that question. However, now Andrew's gone back to work, and I now say I'm a stay-at-home dad. Prior to that, I would say, oh, I'm retired, and then you get people and they go, oh, that must be pretty cool. And I'm like, well, it's actually not pretty cool, because I don't think the world is ready for a 36-year-old retiree. I know I'm certainly not ready to be a 36-year-old retiree.
In the meantime, life as a stay-at-home dad goes on.
Me and Ange had quite a strained relationship for a very long time, but now I've got the help that I've needed, and I'm getting back on track, and you know, we've rebuilt our relationship.
On a scale of 1 to 10, a happiness scale, if 10's very happy, where are you?
I'll probably sit around, like right now, today, probably hover around a 6, thereabouts somewhere. So
That's good.
Yeah. So I went through long periods where I'd quite happily tell you it was a 0. I found absolutely no positives in life at all.
Except the cake.
Yeah, the cake was good. Yeah.
No, I don't.
Clearly, they know their way around a kitchen and around each other. Juggling lunch and making tea. Des and Norm, the son and his father. They're Eatons, a family that started on the land generations back in 2J. Later, Norm was one of a cricket team of sons born in Goomalling, where his childhood was the Depression. In 1939, Norm was at Mount Magnet with one of his 10 brothers. It would be a seminal day.
In consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war.
And so we heard this on the wireless. I said, I'm going down to join up. My brother said, yeah, I'm chucking in my job, I'll go too.
For Norm Eaton, this was a decision probably less red, white and blue than it was pragmatic. He had no job and, as he says, if you didn't work, you didn't eat.
On the Monday morning, we got on our push bikes and we rode from Mount Magnet to Perth to join up.
Really? On push bikes?
Yep.
From Mount Magnet?
Yep. 500 miles on that in those days.
In August that year, Norm had turned 20. And if you're any good with sums, you'll see where this story is going to end. But first, some of Norm Eaton's Second World War. Germans and Italians sweep down Greece from the north. The Allies, battle-weary and poorly armed, withdraw to Crete, where they wait for the Axis assault.
Out of the sky, they come these planes towing a glider. And there were 19 in the plane and 19 in the glider. And we'd been told not to fire till the parachutes opened and they were dead still. Terrible slaughter.
Crete was surrendered to the Germans. Norm Eaton, shot in the leg, was taken prisoner.
With the treatment I got when I was wounded, it changed my attitude towards the German soldiers, not the hierarchy, but to the German soldiers. They were gentlemen.
Thanks to the German gentlemen, Norm Eaton would now be conveyed north via various hospitals. In Belgrade, he learned from an English sergeant that captured NCOs didn't have to work. That was appealing.
The old brain started to turn over and I said, you wouldn't have a spare pair of those stripes, would you? that when you got your sergeants, what did you do with the corporals? Oh, he said, they're in my kit bag. And I said, can I have them? He said, why not?
So for the rest of the war, Norm had 2 stripes and no one ever dobbed him in. And then there was a call for carpenters, a job that had the promise of better food.
We never had a carpenter amongst us, and one of the blokes said, I'm a bush carpenter, he said, and it looks like it's all pine work here, so he said to me, well, tell him you're a carpenter.
Fake carpenter, fake corporal. For Norm Eaton, life in the Stalag rolled on.
They decided to have a Commonwealth Games, and so that was it. They found people in there that were from every part, and that's how the Commonwealth Games was held.
Did you pretend to be an athlete?
No. No, I've still got a stiff leg.
In 1945, there was chaos in Germany. As the Allies closed in, Norm Eaton found himself face to face with an American legend. It was George Patton, who offered a ride in a tank to show Norm where his camp was.
I said, no, sir. He said, why, boy? Are you afraid, boy? I said, yes, sir. And he laughed and he said, I'll arrange for the truck to take you back. And they took us back and we finished up in Brussels and back to England.
Back to England, back to Australia, and back to the land, ending up farming in Buildup Brook. But Norm's war years were not without personal cost.
I didn't realise until I got the word from the repatriation that I was actually the psycho had said that I had.
You were damaged by the war.
Yeah, and they gave me a pension for that. Yeah.
Because back then they didn't really know very much about post-traumatic stress, did they?
War neurosis, they called it.
You've only to think back to that airborne assault on Crete, and you understand why Norm is still suffering.
You were firing at them?
We were firing, killing them by the dozens. I mean,
that seems to upset you.
Well, they were only kids the same age as me. I was just doing my duty the same as they were, doing as I was told. That's the trouble with the whole army. You do as you're told, and some of the hierarchy are not very good at being commanders.
2019 is another seminal year for our hero. In Bunbury, he will be feted this Anzac Day. And again in August, because that's when the long-distance cyclist, the fake corporal, the fake carpenter, the confronter of Patton, turns 100. Happy birthday for then, Norm Eaton.
What a story. 3 wonderful tales from David DeVos here on ABC television as we continue to build up towards the commemorative service to take place at the Perth Concert Hall very soon. Let's pause now and hear from the Governor-General of Australia, General Sir Peter Cosgrove, with his Anzac Day address.
Hello, Peter Cosgrove here. Anzac Day is a day for Australians to pause and remember those who fought and served and died in our name, for our nation, for us. In the last few years, much of the focus of Anzac Day has been on the centenary of the Great War and those diggers who fought so far from home. The legend of their mateship and gallantry has become so great, we hope to see some of ourselves in them. This is a day of memories, and for each of us, it means different things. Today, we hear from servicemen and women who have their own special stories to tell.
At first, I did not participate in Anzac Day because I felt I'd not lived up to the Anzac spirit. And so that was a tough period of my life because I just had felt like I'd let Australia down because I, for whatever reason, didn't consider myself an Anzac.
In terms of what I think of Anzac Day, it's evolved quite a bit. When I lost the 5 guys in Malaysia, the first Anzac Day after that had even more personal meaning for me. And I've also lost colleagues on combat operations and many to suicide as well. So it's a really sombre and very personal day for me now.
We were 5 minutes out from landing. As the aircraft started lowering to prepare to land, we had lowered too far because we were unable to see the ground and had a hard landing into the desert floor at 215 kilometres an hour. All the passengers were flung out all along the way, except for myself and 2 others.
There was a time when I found it hard to attend Anzac Day ceremonies. It was a very private affair, one that I spent with my wife and my children. That extended also to my brothers and sisters, to my parents, and perhaps a phone call to 1 or 2 mates who I'd served with.
We are just very lucky these days. We choose to serve, and I think that over time there's been such a bold development of the Anzac legend that contemporary veterans don't like to associate them or don't feel like they can associate themselves with that type of legend. And certainly whilst you are still serving, there isn't a direct association with the Anzac tradition because of the significance of that story.
When I march with my fellas on Anzac Day, I'll always go in the ranks, not out the front, and on a file that is close to the crowd. And what I try to do as I march along is to look at every young kid, get eye contact. And what I'm thinking then is, we're doing this so you don't have to.
You know, Australia and New Zealand work beside and with each other. And for New Zealand, Australia is our closest defence partner. So everywhere we go and all our deployments, our exercises, our engagement, it is still Anzac, and we really do consider one another, and we are brothers and sisters in arms from way back in, 1915 to now.
And on Anzac Day now, I think of all those who went before us. I think of the men and women who sacrificed so much throughout the world wars and Vietnam and Korea and all of those wars. But now I think of the contemporary veterans as well. I think of those friends of mine who served, those friends who continue to fight their own wars every single day after their service. I think of those people.
I now realise that it's not about me personally. Anzac Day is about remembering everyone who has served Australia and New Zealand to bring about the amazing standard of living we have, the freedoms we enjoy. And for me now, that is what Anzac Day is all about, and that's what I hope to bring my children up to understand.
Back when I was a lot younger, before I first joined the Army, Anzac Day to me was to recognise all the older generations from World War I, World War II and Korea and Vietnam, but I never thought that I would be one of the veterans marching past and being honoured and respected. So
we, Australia at large, confer on them this honorific. They are Anzacs, and they do deserve to march. And the serious faces they show tell me that they're conscious of the legacy, and they'll carry that burden and that honour through all their lives.
Now I attend Anzac Day ceremonies in public as a show of support for those who are in that position before who perhaps feel as if they can't attend.
So I think it's a real special day. It's a personal day and it's a day of reflection.
There are just so many young men and women right now overseas who are continuing to serve our nation. And we need to think about those people on Anzac Day and their families as well.
This will be my last Anzac Day as Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief. I've considered it an absolute privilege to have served and been associated with the great men and women of the Australian Defence Force and by association their families and loved ones. For service past, for those who serve today, Anzac Day always has and always will be about those who serve, their stories and the sacrifices they make. It is on their conscience and courage that we live as we do and aspire for peace and prosperity for future generations. Lest we forget.
Powerful message from His Excellency, the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, the 26th Governor-General of Australia. Coming up at 11 o'clock, we'll take you to the commemorative service being held at the Perth Concert Hall. That's due to start very shortly here on ABC television. But first, The Armed Man is a majestic and emotional piece of music by the Welsh composer Carl Jenkins. It was commissioned by the Royal Armouries Museum for the Millennium celebrations and is dedicated to victims of the Kosovo crisis. Subtitled A Mass for Peace, Jenkins' creation is uncompromisingly anti-war. Here's part of the Mass, Benedictus, with scenes and faces from all of Australia's military engagements. Benedictus there, and on your screen, scenes from the Perth Concert Hall we'll be heading to in the next few minutes for the commemorative service. Our military historians who've done such a terrific job with us over the last few hours here on ABC Television, Wayne Gardner and Steve Danaher, great to see you both with us again, and another terrific morning. The weather did the right thing, the crowds did the right thing. It was great to see the number of people who turn up as they do every year, and so wonderful to see the youngsters coming a long way.
I agree. It's just absolutely outstanding to go through the march and comment and to give this aspect of a subtle way of giving our history across and pointing out our veteran community, male and female, pointing them out by names, those that have left us since the last parade, those that we know there's many veterans who have passed away in that time, but these are a few that perhaps caught our eye or who have been major contributors to our military history in some form or another. Others not so, but worthy of a mention for that final time. But also talking, the ability to talk about the units and value add to the banners we're seeing, the traditions and customs that are going past us down the terrace. It's a wonderful opportunity and a very rare opportunity to have, and it's an absolute privilege to have that opportunity to do it and share that knowledge with the public.
Steve, also terrific to see a number of, or the growing numbers now from more recent conflicts being involved, and that was something that was touched on by the Governor-General in his message to the nation on Anzac Day, but the growing numbers of people who have been involved in more recent conflicts now marching.
Absolutely. We've got members from Afghanistan in particular, and I think it's possibly part of their healing process to a degree as well. Many of them come back fractured people, and it's a way for them to, at least for the general public, to give them some recognition for what they've done and what they've achieved. And it's great to see the younger veterans there, including the ones from peacekeeping operations as well. And just to echo what Wayne said, it's an absolute privilege to be involved with this coverage with the ABC, and it's a rare opportunity for anybody indeed. Thank you.
Well done to both of you, Steve Danaher and to Wayne Gardner. We thank you for your time, and we know that there is an enormous amount of effort that is put in by both of you to make sure that our viewers right around the state have all the details about those that have served, and indeed those that are currently serving and where they're coming from whether they be part of the, as you said so nicely, the senior service, whether they're with the Navy, the Army or the Air Force. It was outstanding again today. Perth Concert Hall is where we're heading next. After that, we'll show you the dawn service from Gallipoli, and then, as I've mentioned, we'll move on to France and the memorial at Villers-Bretonneux. And of course, repeating, there will be a special presentation of ABC News from 7 o'clock tonight that will wrap up everything that happened today from here in Perth, around the nation and indeed around the world. Worth mentioning again, it's now 104 years since the military forces of Australia and New Zealand landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey on the 25th of April, and now 101 years since the end of the First World War. So people have gathered at the Perth Concert Hall. It's a most comfortable place for the commemorative service. Let's head there now and join our MC, my ABC colleague, Mr. Jeff Hutchison.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please be upstanding for the march-in of the Australian and New Zealand flags.
Flag party, 8-10, flag party, quick! Flag party, inwards, turn!
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please remain standing and welcome the Honourable Kim Beazley AC, the Governor of Western Australia.
Flag party, royal salute, salute!
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
Flag party, 810, shut! Flag party, stand at ease!
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jeff Hutchison, and it is my honour to be your Master of Ceremonies here this morning. On behalf of the State President of the RSL of Western Australia, Mr Peter Aspinall AM, I extend a very special welcome to you and would like to acknowledge and welcome the Honourable Kim Beazley, the Governor of Western Australia, the Honourable Mark McGowan, the Premier of Western Australia, Senator Linda Reynolds, CSC, representing the Prime Minister, the Honourable Bjorn Sibma, MLA, representing the Leader of the Opposition, the West Australian Police Commissioner, Chris Dawson, Mr John McCourt, the Chief Executive Officer of the RSL Western Australia, our senior Australian Defence Force officers in WA, senior members of the clergy, members of the Consular Corps, all veterans who have served, and those who are still serving this great nation. Other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and welcome also to the thousands of people across Western Australia who are watching this on ABC television. It is now my great pleasure to invite the State President of the RSL in Western Australia, Mr Peter Aspinall, to the lectern to give his Anzac Day address.
Governor, Premier, distinguished guests, veterans, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. When West Australian-born Edward Isaac Mason enlisted for World War I, he lied about his age. Nothing unusual about that. Lots of young men added a year or two or more to join up. But in Edward Mason's case, it was different. He was already 45 years of age and declared that he was younger than that. On the 16th of July 1916, as a private with the 32nd Battalion, 1st Australian Imperial Force, he was in the trenches near Boulogne, knowing that on the following day they would attack the German lines once more. This was a prelude to what became known as the Battle of Fromelles, in which the 32nd Battalion suffered 718 casualties, 1/3 of its total casualties for the entire war. Mason obviously felt that time was running out for him, so took the opportunity of writing to his children one last time. My dear Hamblin, Arthur and Dorothy, just a parting word, as it is possible you may not hear from me again. We are in the trenches, and tomorrow our battalion has been allotted the task of taking part of the Huns' trenches, and no doubt through papers you have read have formed an opinion what that means. But only those who have been in this infernal machine can realise what it really is. I wish you all a long life and happiness. Your loving father, Dad. The next day, Ted Mason was badly wounded by an exploding shell, and he died 4 days later, the 20th of July 1916. Nearly a century since then, Craig and Debbie Haven, who live in my hometown of Albany, heard a knock at their door. It was every parent's nightmare. An army officer in uniform and a priest were on their doorstep. They were told their son, Private Liam Haven, and those of you who were at the dawn service will remember the Premier in his speech to the dawn service talked about Private Liam Haven. They were told their son, Private Liam Haven, had been seriously wounded by a roadside bomb in Iraq and that a mercy flight had been arranged for them to be by his bedside in Germany, where he was hospitalised. Liam survived and is now blind, yet he lives a full and interesting life, and who could forget his address at our commemorative service on Anzac Day 2 years ago. Two stories, a century apart, but they demonstrate the human face of war and why every effort is needed to prevent conflict wherever it is. Yet the human cost of war is one major reason why we gather on Anzac Day to not only commemorate but to count our blessings that we live in a freedom and that others fought, and many died, for such freedom. World War I saw the emergence of the very first Anzac Day commemoration. It was on a Tuesday, 25th of April 1916. Then our Anzacs were young, most barely in their 20s and early 30s. Today we see a new generation of veterans of a similar age. Like it was back in 1916, we need to be ever vigilant and look after those who return home, look after those who leave the Australian Defence Force for civilian life, and to support them all and their families. This Anzac Day sees the birth of a new Anzac House just across the road, which will open its doors around this time next year to carry on the job of supporting our men and women who served and who continue to serve, and their families. I reflect on the words of Sergeant Karen Hinder in her address at the sunset service last evening. I reflect on the dawn service address by the Premier earlier this morning, and I reflect on the turnout of thousands of people at the dawn service and the Anzac Parade. In such reflections, I am heartened in the reminder that Anzac Day is much, much more than veterans. It is about us as a community. It is all about all of us, our values and our freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand and join Chaplain Squadron Leader Tom Killingback for our first prayer for the Australian Defence Force, followed by the prayer for the leaders of the nation.
I'm a Christian chaplain and I'll be praying out of my Christian faith, but I invite you to join me in whatever faith tradition you hold dear. Let us pray. God of the nations, we ask that in your wisdom you would bless our elected and appointed leaders, especially so close to the next federal election. We ask that our veterans would not become a political football and that their care would be high on the list of our priorities. We ask for your guidance in the use of our Australian Defence Force, supporting the cause of peace, freedom, the rule of law in our immediate neighbourhood and across the world. As our leaders send them on operations in conflict or in natural disaster, we pray that this would occur without greed or ambition or pride, for the building up of our nation and its people. We pray our leaders would serve us with justice, compassion, and determination, regardless of their station or rank. Amen. God of angel armies, we pray too for the members of our Australian Defence Force. We pray that in the midst of isolation, of deployments, exercises or training, they would find mateship and community. That in the waiting, they would find patience and rest. That in the use of force, they would be skilled and disciplined, remembering those they represent. And that in the homecoming to family and friends, they would find safety and open arms of welcome. We also pray desperately and passionately that your support and mercy and that of our whole community would lift them up when it's all over, knowing that for some, the battle never truly ends. It is through your grace that we ask these things. Amen.
Thank you very much, Chaplain Killingback. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are able, and if you are able to remain standing, will you please join the Anzac Day Service Choir in the singing of the hymn, Lest We Forget. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. It is now my very great pleasure to introduce the Governor of Western Australia, the Honourable Kim Beazley, to give his Anzac Day address.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Can I start, as we always do, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. The Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Can I acknowledge too here today Mark McGowan, the Premier of Western Australia, Linda Reynolds, representing the Prime Minister and one of our Defence Ministers, Jorn Sibma, Shadow Minister for Veterans Issues, representing the Leader of the Opposition, Peter Aspinall, State President, John McCourt, Chief Executive Officer, the RSL, Commissioner Chris Dawson, Commodore Brett Dowsing, Captain Ainsley Moorthorpe, Brigadier Moore, Wing Commander Andrew Brandham, members of the Consular Corps, but above all else here, veterans, distinguished guests all. We have been and are one of a small number of nations determined to defend ourselves. Most nations do not. Most nations rely on the kindness of neighbours and strangers, their armed forces for internal security and ceremonial. We have a different view. We have sought allies, firstly with our British founders, then in World War II and afterwards the United States, and of course we've always had with us the New Zealanders, the Kiwis and ourselves merged by a close kinship. But we have never presumed on our allies. We have never thought that they were or should be more mindful of our defence than we ourselves. We have also never thought our defence an easy task. We have always considered and accepted the possibility of an existential threat. We have always assumed its emergence would place the bulk of the response on our shoulders, and the bulk of that on the shoulders of the men and women whose faithfulness, courage and sacrifice we commemorate today. This commemoration serves a dual purpose. One is an expression of gratitude, and we have heard already several wonderful addresses that express that gratitude most sincerely and very well. The other is a signal. It is well beyond these shores a statement to all that we will defend ourselves. Within our shores, it is a statement to our people that collectively we will value sacrifice, we will honour those who make it. We will take responsibility for those who may suffer as a result of it. We say when you take on this burden, you do so because we all think it critical for our survival. Now, encouraging this view in our community is an act of defence in itself. This ceremonial is an act of defence in itself. Nothing is more encouraging when attending a dawn service anywhere in this country, and we all attended it with some 30,000 people this morning, and among communities of Australians globally, than to see young Australians in numbers. They know what the generations have known, the terms and conditions of our survival. The Australian War Memorial this year wants us to concentrate on the contemporary and immediate past contributions of our serving personnel to war, peacekeeping and warlike operations, and I will speak on that briefly shortly. But I want to round out briefly the last 5 years of commemoration of the events from which this Anzac commemoration emerged. Last year we focused this day on the Battle of Villers-Bretonneux. It occurred this day, the last of half a dozen defensive battles, as we then helped blunt the final German assault. That victory foreshadowed the decisive engagement of Australian soldiers in the battles which broke the Hindenburg Line, leading to the armistice and the surrender of Germany and her allies. In global strategic terms, We Australians have never had the influence as a nation that we had then on global politics. We had then an outsized impact on those battles. We were perceived as a nation of character. That character was heavily male. The Anzac, a man of inventiveness, courage, committed to friends, stoic, aggressive in battle, bronzed, loyal, a good friend. Masculine, but it was women who carried this society in the post-war years as a generation of us were shot to pieces. Next year, we'll commemorate the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. That war saw the legend envelop us all, men, women, Indigenous, immigrant. We were the most mobilised nation of all the belligerents, mobilised more than Nazi Germany, mobilised more than Soviet Russia. We were, all of us, intensely engaged. Single women were civilly conscripted. Married women played their part. As well as serving in the forces themselves, Indigenous labour was absolutely critical to our northern defence. We had always owned Anzac Day collectively. Now the reality reflected the perception. And that has been sustained through subsequent wars leading to the contemporary era. As we arrive at the contemporary era, we recognise that the chain of commitment since World War II runs through Korea, Malaya and Vietnam. Indeed, speaking of anniversaries, it is the 50th of the Battle of Bin Ba, a noted event in the history of our engagement with Vietnam, and the Premier sends out each year groups of young Australians to some battlefield, and that's where they are as we speak and we meet here today. Additionally, I've been asked to point out that the 20th of September 2019 marks the 20th anniversary of the deployment of East Timor Interfet, the peacekeeping task force that came to Timor-Leste to address the humanitarian and security issues. As I said earlier, today is a signal to those of us prepared to make a career of the profession of arms. We make today a statement to them that you are valued and honoured. We know as we make it, we are strengthening our community. There are 25,000 veterans in WA. In practical terms, their needs and challenges must be met by us all, where we can, for that is our contribution. It is a sobering thing to be a West Australian in this contemporary era. As we speak, West Australians are providing a large percentage of those serving in Iraq, Afghanistan and further afield. At sea, patrols of naval ships in the northern Indian Ocean have for the best part of 30 years been drawn from HMAS Sterling. We're about to hear from James McMahon, who knows all about these challenges. We are all well aware of the critical role the RSL plays in working for the best approaches to meet those challenges, and I would strongly urge support for their appeal. Still, my mind drifts back to origins, and the most poignant story for me at the end of the war is a female image. It is the picture of 10,000 widows and mothers dressed in black, marching to the waterfront through Sydney's Domain. They went down to the waterfront from where their menfolk had left, casting flowers into the sea. My grandmother was a war widow, so my image of a war widow is one of an old lady. These women were young. Many never married again. They cast flowers into the sea from where their men had left. 60,000, including their husbands and sons, never to return. They and women like them had to handle a society in which over the next decade, a further 60,000 died of war causes. That It was an annihilation of a generation. And it was their womenfolk, mothers, siblings, wives, widows, who sustained society in that decade of the 20s. And frankly, I think in history we don't think enough about that. So that's no better example of the point I made at the outset, that just as we are a nation that defends itself, we have always known that all play a part.
Thank you, Governor, for those words of great passion. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please be upstanding for the prayer for the ADF and those who suffer through war.
God whose heart breaks for the brokenhearted, God of love and mercy, hear our prayer as we ask for your intervention in the lives of those suffering in the midst of war. Where there are broken bodies, heal them. Broken homes, rebuild them. Broken families, bind them back together with comfort and love. Where there are broken communities racked with pain and grief, be their ever-present help in times of trouble. Where there are broken lands, breathe new life into barren fields, allow abundance to return once more. Where there are broken governments, torn apart by partisanship or ideology, allow them to reconcile and think not of their own agendas, but of the whole. God, whose heart breaks with the brokenhearted, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Amen.
Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you again to Chaplain Tom Killingbeck. The Anzac Day Choir will now sing In Memoriam.
Pray.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to what is the most solemn part of today's commemorative service. Would you please stand for the recital of the Ode by RSL WA State President Peter Aspinall, followed by the playing of the last post and 1 minute silence.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Flag party, general salute, attention!
Lest we forget. Lest we forget.
Flag party, attention! Flag party, stand at ease!
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join the Anzac Day Choir in the singing of Abide With Me. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please be seated? The Anzac Day Choir, in particularly good voice this morning, will now sing My Country. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please thank the Australia Day Choir? It's absolutely beautiful. It is now my considerable pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker this morning, Mr. James McMahon. James McMahon is a former commanding officer of the Special Air Service Regiment and knows something about being a contemporary veteran with operational deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan and East Timor. He was personally awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and the Distinguished Service Medal for command and leadership in action in Timor-Leste, Afghanistan and Iraq. As an SAS squadron commander, his squadron was awarded the Meritorious Unit Citation for sustained outstanding service in warlike operations in Timor-Leste and Afghanistan. A recipient of the Sword of Honour Prize for Leadership and the Governor-General's Medal for Academic Excellence, James McMahon is a valued member of the Australian War Memorial Council and speaks to us this morning on what Anzac Day means to him. Would you please welcome James McMahon.
Governor, Premier, distinguished guests that have already been mentioned, those that have served, are serving, their families, fellow Australians, one and all. Before I begin, let me also acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, both past, present and emerging. For me, it is both an honour and a privilege to be asked to speak to you today. I'm simply here because I was fortunate enough to serve my country as a soldier and officer for over 20 years, be deployed on a number of occasions to Timor-Leste, Afghanistan and Iraq. I've had the honour of leading women and men of the Australian Defence Force and Operations, have an incredibly supportive family, and I'm a contemporary veteran. The award medals I wear here are not about me. They are about the operational successes of the women and men I led on operations on behalf of the Australian Government and people. Women and men, just like you and me, who have families and loved ones, who serve on operations with common purpose, courage and determination, knowing that they may, at some point, have to sacrifice their life for the person alongside them, for the mission, and standing up for what is right. Standing up for what is right. Freedom, the mission, service, sacrifice, mateship, all for reflection on this day, Anzac Day. So why reflect? Why do we reflect on this day? In life, we reflect and act on what is important to us. Anzac Day provides us the opportunity every year to reflect on our values as a community and as a nation. Our values are collectively our culture. If you like, it's our Australian way. Our values are what bonds us together, regardless of who you are, where you come from, or your beliefs. These values were created in 1915 by a group of volunteer Australian and New Zealand soldiers. All had different backgrounds and different beliefs, but they all shared common purpose. Most had never experienced combat as they waded ashore before dawn onto a small beach on the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey. Many of these men were only teenagers, some as young as 16, but all were committed to service, duty, and their mate alongside them. Over the 8 months following the landing, a total of 36,000 Australian and New Zealand soldiers were killed or wounded at Gallipoli. However, by their actions of service, courage, mateship, determination and innovation, from then until the end of World War I, the Australians had lived and exemplified on the international stage those values. The Anzacs set the standards that have been handed down and lived every day by all Australian soldiers, sailors and airmen who followed them. From World War II to Korea, Malaya, Borneo, Vietnam, the Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan, Timor-Leste, and many peacekeeping operations in the Middle East, Pakistan, Southeast Asia and Africa. We reflect on the over 102,000 women and men on the honour roll who have died on operational service from Gallipoli through to today. This sacrifice reminds us to continue to learn the lessons of the past and continue to strive for a peaceful world. I say this strongly. This day is not to glorify war or past victories. The Anzacs did not go to war for war. I sometimes think our memorials should be called peace memorials. The sacrifices were made for peace, not for war. Our memorials are a reminder to us of the cost of freedom, standing up for what is right, and in my view, the Australian way. My experience is that these same values, Anzac values, continue in the veterans who have served, those that continue to serve today, and those that serve in our community, a lot who never get recognised. It is important today to acknowledge all current and former members of our Defence Forces, the women and men who represent our country on a daily basis. We currently have women and men on operations as I speak, serving our country on our behalf. As I said previously, women and men, just like you and me, having family and loved ones, serve on operations knowing that they may, at some point, have to sacrifice their lives for the person alongside them. I have experienced this myself, but no family is left untouched when a member of our Defence Force is killed, permanently injured, physically or mentally, in action, and equally as important, in training. It is difficult to comprehend the long-term pain associated with the loss or permanent injury of a parent, partner, child, sibling or friend. And as the Governor said, the grief that is experienced and that was carried on by the widows of World War I. Let us ensure that we remember those that have passed, those with permanent injury, and most importantly, their families. How do we remember them? We remember them by our actions of support and commemoration. Our government support services, profit and non-profit organisations, from my experience, have improved in that support in recent years, responding to 14 years of operations in the Middle East and elsewhere. However, we must continue to improve our coordinated support as we now learn more about mental injuries, suicide, homelessness and transition. It is pleasing to see RSL WA take the initiative by creating the Veteran Central model, providing holistic, coordinated support to those in need. As many leaders have said throughout history, the quality of our community is determined by how we look after all in that community. In conclusion, today we acknowledge the sacrifice and values the Anzacs gave us, exemplifying the Australian way, which bonds us as a community and as a nation. We acknowledge those that have served and those that continue to serve, their families, those that continue to suffer and the support that they require. Importantly for all of us, today we reflect and are thankful for the freedoms we have and remind ourselves and pass on to future generations that the cost of that freedom is eternal vigilance and the courage to fight for that freedom and what is right, just as the Anzacs did and just as we have done ever since, lest we forget.
Thank you very much, James McMahon. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please be upstanding for the prayer of remembrance delivered by Chaplain Tom Killingbeck.
God, you remember your people. You remember your promises. Help us to remember today those lost in war, especially those first Anzacs, Australians and New Zealanders, and all who have followed to offer their lives in the cause of freedom and peace. Help us to remember today those who made it home, but who left a piece of themselves on the battlefields on which they fought. The hills of Turkey, the fields in France, the deserts of North Africa and the Middle East, and the jungles of Southeast Asia, and so many more. Help us to remember those who mourn the loss of loved ones, those who are still waiting for news or closure, those widowed, orphaned, or who have lost a daughter or son. Help us to remember the mateship, the agony, the courage, and the compassion of service in our Australian Defence Force, whatever the branch, whenever the era, help us too to remember the cost, tragedy and horror of war. Lord God, help us to remember, but not only that, and not only on Anzac Day. Help us to work towards a better community, a better nation, a better world in response to the loss we see in war. Through wise action, we will remember them. Amen.
Please be seated. And thank you again, Chaplain. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you agree that this is just a marvellous environment to conduct such an important commemorative service as this, and I'd like to thank the Perth Concert Hall for their support in making us all feel so welcome today. The RSL of WA would not be able to make or conduct Anzac Day without the support and generosity of the community. We'd like to thank Lottery West for their generous support, the City of Perth, Transperth, the Botanic Gardens and Parks Authority, our musical director, Ms. Anne Celia Christmas, and the magnificent voices of our Anzac Day choir, brought together from the Perth Modern School Chamber Choir and the Perth Modern School Alumni Singers, the Salvation Army Perth Fortress Band. Ladies and gentlemen, may we have a round of applause for those. For those who have provided the inspiring sounds today, the WA Police Service, St John Ambulance, Constable Care, the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, other emergency services, Rotary WA, the Salvation Army, the Anzac Day volunteers, rovers and scouts and guides, and of course the Australian Defence Force. And last but not least, all of the people across Western Australia who so generously contribute to Anzac Day commemorations in their communities. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, will you please be upstanding for the National Anthem of New Zealand, followed by the National Anthem of Australia.
Flag party, general salute, 8-10, shun!
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our service.
And that's where we'll leave the Perth Concert Hall and the commemorative service there. Thank you to Jeff Hutchison. And that concludes indeed our coverage of the 2019 Anzac Day March from the streets of Perth and from the Perth Concert Hall. Thank you very much for your company this morning, and on behalf of the entire ABC television team, we appreciate you being with us for Anzac Day 2019 as we pay our respects on this day of contemplation. Remember what those before us did to allow us to live the way that we do, lest we forget.